Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be reading true vacation and travel horror stories. I hope you enjoy them. I also have an announcement that I want to make at the beginning of this video. Starting at the next video and moving forward on all new story videos, I'm going to be doing a featured comment section at the intro of my videos. So, make sure that you leave a comment down below. I'll be responding to things such as questions, comments, or anything in between. I'll be picking a comment from the previous video, and I'll be featuring it in the next video. So, if you would like to be featured in one of the videos, make sure that you leave a comment down below, and I'll make sure that I pick a comment and react to it in the next video. But anyways, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true scary stories. So back when I was 13, the summer before 8th grade, I went on a trip for a month to Venezuela and Puerto Rico with my then best friend. My first creeper encounter was when we went to Playa Agua. I think that's the name, it's a beach. First of all, it was beautiful. It looked like a postcard. And while this isn't really relevant, everyone wore really revealing bathing suits. Everyone. Though I guess it's somewhat relevant considering that I and my friend were the only ones wearing normal bathing suits. So you wouldn't think that we wouldn't gather any attention. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Well, once we had our towel and stuff set up, we were going to go ahead and get in the water, so we took our shirts off. We were wearing our swimsuits underneath, when we noticed a 40-something-year-old man staring at us. I'm pretty sure that he wasn't a local, but another tourist like us. We didn't even look mature for our age. If anything, we could have probably passed for 11-year-olds. And it was weird that he was staring at us given there was an abundance of girls our age who were wearing other, more revealing bikinis. In that same vein, neither of us were particularly attractive. Maybe he liked us because we were obviously American. We glared at him and he kept on staring. We figured screw it and took off our shorts and hauled butt into the water. Stupid, I know, but we were 13. Anyways, by the time we went back, he was gone. The second encounter was on the return trip back. We were waiting in the Miami airport for our connection back home when I wanted to get a drink. As I was waiting in line, some guy I'd say about in his 20s comes up behind me and whispers, "I really like you." I just turned and gave him a what the heck look until he eventually shifted away. I decided to not get any drinks by myself after that. But anyways, those were my stories. I hope you enjoyed. Okay, so I went on vacation with my mom and sister to Florida a few years back during spring break. The area where we stayed is a nice neighborhood, a neighborhood full of people's summer homes and getaway houses. We were staying in my mom's best friend's beach house, and the three of us were walking home from the house where my aunts and cousins were staying. Now mind you, these streets are pretty dark. There are a few streetlights on the corners, but otherwise when it's dark, it's dark. So my mom, sister, and I are walking down the road back to our beach house. My mom is walking ahead of my sister and I. We're walking side by side. And we cross an intersection and see a man in what appears to be a white button-up top and nice black slacks with an undone tie resting on his shoulders. He's a good few yards away, but he starts talking to us. "Hey, pretty ladies, do you guys have any jumper cables? My car just broke down back there and I could use some help," he said. Looking past him, there was no car. There was a streetlight near him and we could see that he was alone. "No, sorry, we don't have our car here," I replied, taking my sister's arm and walking faster. The creepier part is that he starts following us at a distance. I periodically look over my shoulder and can still see him walking slowly behind us. Eventually, we think we lose him, but there's still a feeling of unease in the pit of my stomach. So my sister, mom, and I make it back to the beach house, and my sister and I quickly lock the screen door, turn the front porch lights off, and close the blinds inside the house, keeping a careful eye to the outside from the windows. My mom thinks that we're being ridiculous and the guy genuinely just needed some help. But I know my gut and I wouldn't be feeling uneasy if I didn't think it was suspicious. A few minutes later, guess who is walking down the street? The man in the white button-up stands and stares straight at my sister and I through the window from the street. I guess we weren't being that subtle. And then keeps walking, disappearing into the night. I have never been so terrified in my entire life. I recently turned 28, and I've had a crazy year. Started a new business with all that entails, and in the beginning of July, I felt absolutely exhausted. I had finally reached the point where my small business didn't need constant maintaining, and I saw my chance to escape and have a mini vacation. I sat down with my laptop and started looking for a suitable place to rent, and saw a photo of this adorable old-fashioned cottage in Gotland, an island in Scandinavia. I read up on the area and felt very drawn to the old history and culture surrounding the place, and soon I had made the arrangements to go there. The cottage belonged to an elderly couple who lived in a larger house further down the road, but other than that, there were no neighbors. The sea was only a short walk away with a private beach. It was heaven. I spent my days outdoors, swimming, hiking, renting a bike, and just enjoying the fairy tale inspiring nature. Maybe my happy mindset and the fact that I was determined to relax and rest caused me to ignore the slightly alarming details that kept adding up. Every evening as I got home to the cottage, some tiny little thing would have changed. The flower pot outside the door would be turned the other way. The thermostat would be turned up, and my passport that I could have sworn that I had left on the kitchen table would be moved to the counter. One day, I woke up feeling strangely sick, in a diffused sort of way. So instead of leaving the house right after breakfast, I went back to bed. Less than an hour later, I can hear a key turning and the front door opening. Slow steps walking around the living room and kitchen area outside the bedroom. Since I had clearly heard the key turning in the lock, I felt that it must be the landlord, and opened the door to the living room without hesitation. The man standing in the middle of the room looked absolutely stunned to see me, and it wasn't the landlord. "Who are you?" I asked, since it wasn't the elderly house owner but a younger bloke. "Sorry, I thought you were out," he smiled. "I'm Tommy. I look after the place for my parents. I stopped by just to make sure that your fire alarm is working. I hope I didn't scare you." "No, I don't scare easily," I replied, and informed him that there's no fire alarm in the cottage. In fact, I had already looked for that. "Oh, I'll buy one and come by with it later then," he said as he left in a hurry. The rest of that day I had a lingering feeling of uneasiness, but I pushed it to the back of my mind, and come morning I had successfully moved on from the incident. It wasn't until my last evening before going back home that it happened. I was packing my bags, loud music playing, cleaning up a bit, and just getting ready to leave early the following morning. It was dark outside now, and I suddenly realized that I couldn't locate my new sunglasses. I thought maybe I had left them outside when sunbathing, and I switched on the outdoor lighting just to see if I could spot them on the grass. And I was shocked to see a large figure standing pressed against the French window. I could only see the shape of him, but I knew instinctively that it was him. I switched off the lights inside the cottage to make it harder for him to see me, and ran around, checking that all the windows were locked. The next time I looked his way, he was gone. I felt so shaken and uncomfortable with his experience. Then I decided to leave and spend the night at the airport awaiting my flight. Only problem was I had to walk across the dark garden to my car, and he could be lurking anywhere. I didn't know what he wanted or why. Was he just a perv or actually dangerous? I even considered phoning the police, but thought of how ridiculous my story would sound. So instead, I took my backpack, selected a large and intimidating looking knife from the kitchen, opened the door, and ran for dear life to my car. I can't be sure that it wasn't my imagination, but I felt certain that I heard movement among the thick brushes as I ran past him, and I shouted, "I got a knife, stay away from me." I spent the night at the airport and went back home the following day, not as rested or relaxed as I had hoped, but it did take my mind off of my business for a while. I'm unsure of the intentions my parents had, as in if they were going to kidnap me or anything. Reading these stories made me remember a potential creeper story, so I'll post it here. I was around 7 or 8 and on vacation with my mom and her best friend in the Dominican Republic. Punta Cana, I think. So I was swimming around and I met this girl. From what I remember, she seemed to be about my age, but I don't remember her name at all. Maybe it was Sarah, so I'll call her that. We would swim around and splash each other and all that good stuff. One day we were sitting at the pool bar drinking some chocolate shakes when she nervously tells me that her parents got a watch stolen from them by a maid. She didn't know much about it, and we quickly went back to playing. Thinking back now, the nervousness was odd. The following day, I was setting out with my mom and her best friend when Sarah and her parents come up to me and ask if I want to go with them to their room to find the watch by myself. I remember them looking kind of unkempt, and their presence was a little strange. I asked for permission to go, but was told no. Of course, I was pretty bummed, but thank God for my mom's A+ parenting. I just asked her about it, and the reason she said no was because there was no reason for me to be going with them. Not that she thought I would be kidnapped. But looking back on it now, it does seem just a little bit creepy. I can't think of any other encounters I've had, but if I do, I'll be sure to post. I don't know where else to go with this, and it still bothers me. So, sorry if this isn't exactly fitting for this subreddit. This was maybe 6 to 7 years ago. I have photos on my camera still, but I think I haven't charged it in ages. Gave up on photography. You know how it is. So I hope that y'all will just trust me. So we've been going on these trips as a family for a really long time now. Probably 17 years if I had to guess. I won't say where it is that we go, but it's the Australian bush just to give y'all an idea of the setting. Anyway, we've had a few creepy experiences there, but nothing inexplicable. But this event still weirds me out, and I can't really think of anything that explains it. The year of this, my sister, cousin, dad, and myself all drove up together, and were the first to arrive at the house. We had to wait for my grandma to arrive with the key, so my dad sat on the deck with a beer, and my cousin and I went on a little journey. The three of us made our way to a little creek not far from the house that we nicknamed Bride to Terabithia, because of a tree that had fallen and acted like a bridge for us to use to cross the creek. This creek never had water in it though, and was not deep or wide, so we could easily walk through it, but the tree was fun. Anyways, my cousin makes an off-the-cuff comment as we walk across the tree, asking sort of sarcastically, "Is there something dead around here?" because of how many flies that were there. Lo and behold, we get to the other side, and there was something dead. We were greeted with a dead kangaroo. Nothing too jarring. I had seen plenty on the side of the road, but this one was cut clean in half. And when I say clean, I mean clean. Like it was a perfect half. There wasn't an ounce of blood on the fur, no blood on the ground, and the top half was nowhere to be found. I happened to have my camera on me and took some photos of it. Then my cousin poked it with a stick, and literally hundreds of flies came out. My cousin and sister kept poking at it, trying to move it into the creek, but a fully grown kangaroo, even half of one, isn't exactly light. Their sticks broke, so I grabbed it by the tail and pulled it into the creek so that we could bury it, but we really just covered it with sticks and flowers. We looked around up top everywhere for the second half, or a trace of what might have happened to it, but we couldn't find anything. We ended up going back down into the creek and walking through it looking for something, and what we found only made it even more confusing. We found, if I'm remembering it correctly, 4 dead rabbits, but only their bottom halves, all lined up neatly along the floor of the creek until it reached thick brush that we couldn't walk through. Same thing with these rabbits though. No top halves to be found, no blood anywhere, and cut clean in half. Sorry if this was way longer than intended, but I hope that y'all will read through it and maybe give me some ideas to explain what this was. P.S. We still go to this area every year, and have never seen anything like this again. To start this story, I'm a male, and I was maybe 9 years old when this happened. My family and I were in the middle of a great family road trip in the American Southwest. While we were driving through Colorado, we all needed to go to the bathroom and stretch our legs, so we decided to stop at the nearest gas station. We had just visited the Grand Canyon, so this tiny gas station we stopped at shortly afterwards was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. At this point, neither my parents nor my 2 brothers were in any hurry to get back into the car for another day of driving through the desert. So, after we had done our business, my parents stayed inside the gas station to look at food and enjoy the free air conditioning, leaving my brothers and I to walk around the parking lot and stretch our legs. As I said before, this gas station was in the middle of nowhere, so I had assumed that we were the only ones there. But boy was I wrong. I came to discover that we were not alone after wandering away from the storefront to the side of the building, where I saw a blue sedan parked but still running in the farthest spot away from me. I gave it a passing glance and assumed the car was owned by tourists like me. I kicked rocks against the wall of the building for a while, not really paying attention to the car, until I eventually heard the sound of feet running towards me. I looked up to see a wild-haired man who kind of looked like Andrew WK making a beeline from the car to me, all while making eye contact with me the entire time. I'll never forget the wild look in his eyes, or the way his stare caused me to completely freeze up and grip the wall of the building, as if the world had flipped upside down and I was at risk of falling off. I was only a little kid, and I didn't really understand what was going on, but I knew that this man could hurt me, and he was coming right at me. I experienced a weird sensation where everything happened so fast, but at the same time, I felt as though everything was moving at half speed. As I stood there frozen to the wall of the gas station, the wild-eyed man took what seemed like an eternity to finally reach me. As soon as he was within reaching distance from me, my heartbeat quickened as I braced myself for whatever was about to happen. It was at the climax of that movement when I felt a hand grab my shoulder from behind, breaking me out of the trance that I was under. It was my brother, grabbing me from behind to tell me that our parents were done browsing the snacks at the gas station, and that we were about to pack the car up again and leave. It was at that moment when my brother rounded the corner that caused the man to change his route at the last minute and run right past us. The man ran a lap around the parking lot, and then hauled himself back to the car that he came from and peeled out of the parking lot as fast as he could. It seemed as if no one in my family, not even my brother who had grabbed me, had noticed the man or the car at all. As his blue sedan drove into the desert, I shrugged it off and piled back into the minivan, and we went on our way as if nothing had happened. I was so young that I didn't even think to mention it to my family. Hi, I've been a lurker for quite some time now, and all these stories made me think about some creepy encounters of my own. I decided I would tell this story first, because this one is that. Even though it's a long time ago, I remember it quite well. My mom and I went on vacation to Italy a few times. This time we could stay in the house that's owned by the uncle of my mom. It was a nice house with a gate on top of a hill. My mom spent a lot of time there as a kid and as a teenager. When she was 14, she started dating an Italian boy who lived pretty close to where the Vatican home is. When we went there on vacation, she thought that it was a really nice idea to visit his parents who still lived in the area. She had stayed there a few times when she would go alone to visit her Italian boyfriend, so she was really curious about how things were going with his parents. We picked a day and headed out to buy bus tickets and went on our way. The bus was quite full and very hot. I was so happy to finally get out of there after about 2 hours. I won't get into too many details about the time that we spent visiting the parents of the Italian guy that she had dated, but we stayed there all day, so now it was dark out, and thankfully less hot. So that could only be a good thing when we had to go back to the bus again. Or so I thought. A bus pulled up to the side where we were waiting. The bus didn't look like anything like the bus we took when we went there. This bus was like the one that you would take if you went on vacation with a bus. Now that I think of it, it was really stupid for us to not look at the logo or even get in. But we just went in even though we thought it was strange. The whole bus was completely empty, so we took the first seats right next to the driver. He wasn't that creepy looking, just normal, I guess. Not all creepers look creepy, but still, there was something off. We had tickets for the bus, and since there was no ticket machine in this bus, my mom asked what she needed to do with them. He looked at them and just ripped something off and said it was okay. His English was not very good either, or he might have just pretended, so, he can pretend not to understand something we said. We got to an intersection where one was to our area, and the other one went somewhere else, and the driver took the wrong one. My mom and I got worried, so my mom asked him why he was going the wrong way, and he said that it was the right way. I could feel myself getting anxious, but at the same time I was young, so I still believed that he wouldn't do anything bad to us. For that time that I was in the bus. My mom decided now that we were not too far away from the place that we visited. She needed to do something. She pretended to get sick and told him to stop. He didn't want to and just kept driving. My mom stayed very persistent, and when she told him that she was going to vomit, he finally stopped alongside the road, and we quickly got out. While my mom faked throwing up, she was standing with her back to the bus. But I looked at it, and while I locked eyes with the driver, he turned off the lights inside the bus and closed the doors. For some reason, him turning the lights off really got me creeped out, and wondering what he was planning to do to us. My knees were actually starting to feel weak. We quickly walked back to the place that we visited. Outside of their building, there were like cafes and the real bus stop that we actually had to stand instead of where we were waiting in the first place. Traveling in a country, you don't live in a can, and it can be a real struggle. But anyways, in one of the cafes, my mom called a taxi since the bus driver had ripped our bus tickets. I remember both my mom and I were pretty shaken up by this weird and creepy experience, and I felt like I couldn't even trust this taxi driver. We decided that we wouldn't let him bring us all the way up to the top of the hill, and made him stop halfway up there, so we had to walk only halfway up. Of course, there was nothing wrong with this taxi driver, but we were just careful. Really careful after what had just happened. We got out and went up the hill, and while we were walking, we suddenly heard a loud breathing behind us. We both freaked out, and at first, I didn't want or dare to look behind me. But when I finally got the courage to do so, I saw a man walking his dog. Not sure which one of them breathed so loudly, but at least now I can laugh about that part at least. I think we even ran up the hill for the last bit. I've never been so happy to arrive safely back to my vacation house. This might not be the scariest story that you've ever read here, but I thought that I should still share it. I can't stay a lurker forever. There's this story going on now here of two Dutch girls. I'm Dutch as well. And they were on vacation, and they're missing. So it made me think of this story again. Back in the summer of 2017, a group of around a dozen peers pitched in for a house to get away and celebrate a birthday. A basic residential area around semi-rural lake near Shelton, Washington. The house had a separate garage with a few beds, where myself and a few others were sleeping that night. The house sat above the lake with a deck as well as a little pier down in the water. After a long day of cooking, drinking, and playing games, it was time to crash at around 2 a.m. With more people than beds, some were on couches on the floor of the living room. Folks had been drinking fairly heavily and were out cold. At around 3:30 a.m., I woke up with a need to use the bathroom. As I'm putting my pants on, I notice out the window the long, diffuse shadow of a person moving in some light on the street outside. I thought nothing of it. Somebody just walking their dog or something. I made the walk across the driveway with the key in hand and noticed the door is unlocked. I go in to find a friend checking their phone in that drunken daze after only a short amount of sleep. Confused, he whispered, "Weren't you just in here?" They ask. I say no, and they ask if someone else from the garage was out of bed. I said no again, and my buddy shook it off, albeit super confused. Confused myself and a bit amused, I did my business and returned to bed, locking the door behind me. The next morning, all were awake and in the main space cooking breakfast and enjoying the sunshine. Two of my other friends, a couple, asked if there was any open windows in the house overnight, as one of them was convinced that a draft opened their door from a cracked position. Their bedroom was at the back of the house, past at least 5 people sleeping in the living room and 2 other bedrooms. There was one open window, but no others in the house, so I'm not sure about the draft. The guy that I had spoken to during my bathroom trip piped in to ask if they know what time this happened. They said right around 3:30, right when he thought that he saw me walk through the house, and I saw the shadow move down the street. We all got chills when all these details came to bear. It was then that somebody brought up a Twitter or Facebook post about somebody reportedly breaking into homes in the area for months. That story is linked below. We never reported anything as we're not sure that this is what happened. Turns out the guy was a perv and liked to watch women sleep. Now, all 3 of these events could totally be coincidence. But looking back at these years later, I'm convinced that our rental was victimized by this creep. Nobody in our group was armed, and I'm not sure if there was any security system. I also am fairly confident that I'm not the one who left the door unlocked. I hope you enjoyed the story, because it definitely gave us all the creeps. This is my first post on this sub, but I've frequented it for a while. This is really the only experience I've had that would fit on this sub, and it felt so surreal while it was happening. So, I'm a 21-year-old male, and this experience happened last summer, while I was on vacation at Myrtle Beach with my family. We were staying in a resort right on the beach, and we're on the 13th or 14th floor in a sort of timeshare. One night, I was feeling restless and having a hard time falling asleep, and at around 3 a.m., I decided to go out on the balcony to get some air. I stepped out and was stunned as there was a full moon, and the moonlight on the water was really beautiful. The beach was completely empty as far as I could see, and I had never seen it like that before. I decided since I wasn't able to sleep, I might as well head down, take a stroll, and listen to some music to relax. Hopefully when I returned I'd be able to get some sleep. It was really unsafe and dumb of me, but since it was 3 a.m. and the rest of my family was asleep, I decided to just head down without letting anyone know I was going, as I thought I'd just go and chill there for 10-15 minutes, then come right back up. So at the base of the timeshare we were at, there was an area with a pool, an outdoor bar, and then 2 boardwalks separated by about 100 feet, which both led to the beach. On the sides of the boardwalks, there were swaths of tall grass separating the ocean and the resort. When I got down to the base, the entire area was completely deserted, and I started walking down the boardwalk on the right towards the beach. As I'm walking down, I suddenly see someone approaching me from the beach, which was strange because I had a pretty clear view of this same area from the balcony just before, and had literally seen no one. I start to get a bit nervous as I see this figure approach, and as I get closer, I see it as a man, maybe in his late 30s, who has a backpack on and is wearing glasses with large, square lenses. As he gets closer, I get a clearer look at him as the boardwalk is sort of illuminated by lights from the outdoor bar. He looks very on edge and alert, almost like he is trying to find someone who is trying to meet him in this area, and his clothes are somewhat tattered. We made eye contact and I sort of nod at him and pass. At this point I'm creeped out, because honest to God he had a sort of Jeffrey Dahmer look. Maybe it was the glasses, and he just didn't seem like he actually belonged to the timeshare. I shake it off and keep walking down to the beach and put my headphones in. As I get down to the beach, I turn right and start walking parallel to the water, and I'm just taking in the scenery. I'm barefoot and decided it'd be nice to walk just along the shoreline, so I move closer to the water and continue walking. I'm walking for no longer than a minute before I get a really strange feeling that something is wrong. I take off my headphones and turn around, and I see a dark figure that is trailing me just up shore. He is situated in between me and the timeshare. I immediately can tell from the figure's height, body type, and demeanor that it is the same man I passed on the boardwalk. At this point, I'm starting to panic, as every story from Let's Not Meet is rushing to my head. At the same time, I'm trying to rationalize as it feels too surreal that I may actually be in a dangerous situation. So I remind myself it could just be a coincidence, and the man decided he also wanted to take a walk on the beach, and just happened to be headed in the same direction as me. So I take some breaths and turn my head back to the ocean and continue walking in the same direction. After a couple seconds, I turn my head back again, and see that now he is much closer to me, and is not walking parallel to me, but is definitely actually walking towards me. I pick up my walking speed now, and turn my head back around, and see he is matching my faster pace and is still walking towards me in the water. Still, for some reason I think, okay, maybe he also wants to walk by the water. There's no way I'm actually being followed by a creepy man on a deserted beach. So at this point, to truly test it, I do a 180 and completely change directions. And as I turn my head, I see him completely change directions with me and continue closing in distance. And he is power walking now. It suddenly hits me that I'm in a really bad situation, and I take off in a run along the water, and he starts running as well, but stays up shore of me so that if I try to run up towards the boardwalk, he will intercept me. I'm freaking out now and just keep running with no plan, but figure that since I'm 20 and sort of fit, I should probably be able to keep running along the water and outrun him, and then find some other exit off the beach and either call my family or head back to the timeshare on the road. So I keep running, but he's keeping up with me, and this goes on for what feels like 10-15 minutes. The scariest part of all this, which I wouldn't have thought of, is it is completely dead silent. All I hear is my breath and feet on the sand, and when I turn I only see his shadowy figure up shore keeping pace with me. Suddenly, up ahead in the sand, I see a small blue light, and what looks like 4 people on the beach with a blanket. They are a bit upshore. I turn and look at the figure and bet even though they are upshore, I can beat him to these people. So I start sprinting towards them with hopes of quickly telling them what's going on so we can all confront him. I really use up my energy sprinting towards them, and as I approach, my heart drops. What I see is 4 guys on a blanket with 3 or 4 handles of hard liquor surrounding them. 3 of the handles are empty, and the 4th is about half empty. 3 of the guys are just completely passed out on the blankets, and the last is half sat up, obviously beyond drunk, with a sort of party hat on that has blue lights on it, and he is talking to himself. His eyes are half closed, and he doesn't even register me approaching him, even though now I'm no more than 5 feet away. I turn and see the figure has slowed down and is observing me, and then I see he makes sense of the group's state and suddenly starts sprinting at me. As he gets closer, the half-passed out guy's blue light illuminates him, and I can clearly see it's the same guy as before. I make eye contact with him, and I can see he's wide-eyed and looks almost manic, and is barreling at me full sprint. At this point, I decide I have to do something decisive. It seemed like I had underestimated his fitness, and since I had just sprinted towards this group and exhausted myself, I was afraid that he might actually be able to catch up to me if we just continued running along the beach indefinitely, and then who knows what. So, instead of turning around and running, I suddenly sprint towards him and to the right, which I don't think he was expecting at all. I catch him off balance and run past him, and I literally am full sprinting back to the timeshare without even looking back. Literally all the hairs on my neck were standing, and it felt like a dream where you're barely evading someone but he's right about to catch you. The adrenaline was crazy, and I keep running and start to see the timeshare. I finally turn around to see how close he is, and I see him in the distance maybe 400 to 500 feet away. He's lost a lot of distance on me. I don't waste any time and sprint up the boardwalk and towards the base of the timeshare. I jam the elevator buttons and leap in, and start mashing the close door button as I'm gasping for air. The door closes, and I hit the button for my floor, and when the elevator reaches, I literally sprint back to my room, open the door, enter, and then slam the door and double lock it. I'm breathing heavy and I drop to the floor and just sit there for a minute, not believing what just happened. I crouch and crawl over to my room, as I was literally afraid he might be able to see me through the window on our balcony, and I enter my room. Let's just say I definitely wasn't able to sleep after that. Guy who chased me on the beach, let's not meet again.
I was on vacation with my family when I was about 14. I was in the pool, which had a bar attached, and I was casually talking to this group of British people. I want to say it was all guys, but I think I remember a girl being with them. I started drinking a bit with them. The legal drinking age was 18, but the people who I was drinking with gave me an extra wristband they had because apparently they were leaving the resort that day and wanted to give it to someone. My parents didn't know about this, and neither of them knew that I was drinking. They were clearly a lot older and kept putting drink after drink in my hand, and I was ecstatic because I was, well, getting drunk in a pool in Cancun and out of sight from my mother. They started to try to convince me that one of the guys in the group was 15 and that I should talk to him because he liked me. Even then, I knew he definitely wasn't 15, but he also wasn't as old as the others who seemed to be in their late 30s. In hindsight, I'm thinking probably mid to late 20s. I was young and just thought they were joking around with me. They kept telling me that he liked me and I should go hang out with him. I laughed it off the first time, but they kept suggesting. Keep in mind, this whole time my dad was in the same pool talking to his friend, and he had his eyes on me for almost the whole time. My parents are very strict. He didn't know what I was drinking was alcoholic, and the pool was big enough that you couldn't hear what was being said. At that point, I was totally wasted, and my first time actually getting seriously drunk. I don't even remember leaving the pool with this guy trying to tell me that he was 15, but apparently my idiot self did,
because I remember thinking that he was cute. The resort is huge, and I don't know how I don't remember walking through the whole thing and not remembering it. I wonder what we spoke about. The next thing I remember is walking and approaching a bus stop that was a 10-minute walk from the resort. I know that it was 10 minutes because my family and I often went to the bus stop to explore Cancun. He told me that I had a nice body, and asked me other things as well. I just started laughing, and he sat on the bus bench and pulled me onto his lap. At this point, my world is spinning, so I don't protest, even though I remember thinking I wanted to be back at the pool. It was then that something beautiful happened. I threw up all over him. Remember, I'm on his lap at this point, so it was like right in his face and on his chest. And I just kept throwing up, like exorcist-level projectile vomiting. He was extremely grossed out, and I don't remember what was being said, but we ended up walking back to the resort, and I never saw him again. I remember feeling so embarrassed, which is ridiculous in hindsight. I wobbled back to the pool area covered in throw up, where my mom had called the police, and her and my dad were freaking out. My mom's piercing voice sobered me up a bit, because I remember these parts a lot clearer, even though they're still hazy. They saw how drunk I was and demanded to know what happened, so I told them. Then they got furious. My mom was adamant on finding that guy or his friends who had all disappeared from the pool. I didn't really see what the big deal was back then and why she wanted to find them. To this day, I think about what would have happened if I hadn't thrown up like that and actually left with him. I was 5'2" and 14 years old, and he was at least a foot taller than me, and definitely not a minor. I remember when he was close to me, with no one around, and even in my extremely drunk state, I started to get a bit nervous. My parents took me back to our hotel room, and I spent hours in the bathtub just throwing up. My mom was furious, like completely livid. I wasn't too surprised at that because she yelled at me over trivial things all the time. So was my dad, which did surprise me, because he's always so easygoing, and honestly probably would have been a bit amused at me being drunk, throwing up. Not in a cruel way, but because I was learning a lesson about alcohol that we all eventually do. He actually straight up told me that at some point before this whole vacation. But I know that his anger wasn't directed towards me. He was cursing about the guy. I was still throwing up in the bathtub, and they had both went into the kitchen area to walk away from me. But I could vaguely hear my dad cursing terribly while speaking to my mom in our native language, and I was actually scared. I couldn't quite focus on his voice because I was legitimately drifting in and out of consciousness at that point. But I remember getting less scared and more just sad because I felt like I had disappointed him. He never got mad like that towards me. But then again, I realized later that he wasn't angry at me. And he wasn't angry at the drinking. He was angry at the scumbag. I remember wondering why they were making such a big deal. It was a few years later that I finally understood. Later on that day, because this all happened at like 2 in the afternoon, so I was at least cognizant by dinner time, I expected my mom to blow up at me over dinner when I was sober, as she usually does. That woman's like a live fuse. But they were both just kind of quiet and staring at me, and they didn't want to leave my side. I can't imagine what they were going through, knowing about the danger I had been in hours before, staring at me like it was a miracle that I was there. I was young and stupid, but I would like to give my deep thanks and gratitude to beer for constantly annoying my stomach to the point of projectile vomiting. This story happened in the early 2000s. I was vacationing in the Caribbean with my family when I was about 9 or 10 years old. This particular island, like many in the Caribbean, was largely impoverished. Of course, the resort communities where all the tourists flocked to were beautiful slices of paradise. As a young kid staying at a fancy vacation spot, you don't really think about the reality that you're in a foreign country that you don't know very well. You're not familiar with what goes on outside of the gated resort, and you certainly aren't aware that as well as being known for gorgeous beaches, many islands in the Caribbean are hubs for human trafficking, drug smuggling, etc. The sheer sketchiness of what I'm about to describe didn't fully hit me until years later when I was in high school and reading about the disappearances of Amy Bradley and Natalie Holloway, who both vanished while on vacation in the Caribbean in the late 1990s and early 2000s. One night, I left the resort with my family to go on one of those sunset boat ride sort of deals. We joined another family and took a shuttle to a marina that was maybe half an hour away from the resort. I remember as we rode to the marina, I got more of a sense of how destitute some of the less touristy areas of the island were. I saw many of the locals living in a small ramshackle huts made out of salvaged metal, and that the landscape was very much barren desert, unlike the lush gardens that were watered daily within the walls of the resort. Anyway, the shuttle dropped us all off at the docks and we went on the boat tour. It was an amazing time. The boat's crew pointed out unique wildlife and told us about the history of the islands. By the time we returned to the docks, it was pitch black out, probably at around 11 p.m., and barely being 10 years old, I was thoroughly exhausted. I hopped out of the boat and walked along the dock back to the parking lot where the shuttle had dropped us off earlier. My parents and the other adults who we were with didn't really seem to be paying attention to me, thanks to Captain Morgan and Stella Artois. And by the time they'd gotten off the boat, I was probably a decent 200 feet ahead of them. Now, the marina itself was very well lit, but as soon as I turned the corner to the parking lot, I may as well have fallen into a cave. I could hardly see anything. I squinted my eyes to try to see if the van we'd arrived in was parked nearby, but after a few seconds, somebody suddenly grabbed my shoulder very tight. "Who did you come here with?" The voice was scolding, accusatory, and I immediately began freaking out because I thought I was in trouble. "Somebody drove you here?" I began to speak and try to explain that I was with my family and we were waiting for our driver, but the man cut me off. "You drove here with me. Here, come to my car." At this point, the guy began pulling me further into the dark parking lot towards a vehicle I had never seen before. I wouldn't even say that I was panicking at this point. I was very confused and knew that something was definitely not right about the situation, that I'd been raised to listen to adults and didn't want to get in trouble for not listening to the guy. But as he continued to pull me towards his car, I realized that it was much too small to fit the number of people who'd I'd arrived with. And this is when I started to really pull back against the guy, and I was trying to break his grip. I was about to raise my voice and start screaming, when suddenly a set of floodlights turned on and lit up the parking lot. My parents and the group of people we were with turned the corner, and the guy immediately let go of my arm. I looked up at him, and all I remember is that he looked scary. He was bald and had scars on his face. He was probably in his late 40s. Clearly, he didn't realize that an entire group of people were just 30 seconds behind me. His eyes were wide, and he had a dumbfounded / oh crap expression. One of the men who worked at the dock called out and said something to him, but he sort of threw up his arms and shrugged and quickly walked away. On the way back to the resort, my dad asked me something like, "What did that guy want from you?" And in my childish naivety, I said, "I think he thought I rode on his shuttle and that I was lost or something." And apparently this explanation was perfectly reasonable, because we never really spoke about it again. Anyway, I guess the moral of this story is, if you have young children and like to take them with you to exotic or unfamiliar locations, remind them to be smart and keep their guard up, even in paradise. Hey everyone. I've been lurking around for a while now and finally decided to post my own story. Some backstory first. This happened this past summer in Zadar, Croatia. My family is from Zadar, and I have been there 7 times, so I know the city fairly well. I also know the language well enough to get around. Part of the reason for my trip this past summer was to learn more of the language. I went for 2 months and stayed with my grandparents in our village north of Zadar, same village as my cousin. As I was nearing the end of my 2-month adventure, my cousin and I decided to go to the city and drink with some of his friends. Since we don't live in the city, we had to take a bus as my grandmother didn't want me driving. Once we got to the city, I follow my cousin down some back roads until we get to one of the main roads, heading towards the old town. Like I said, I've been here before, so I knew where we were. As we're walking behind a group of girls, my cousin is still complaining about the price of the bus ticket. It was 39 kilometers, but he claims it should have been 19, which is about $6.12 and $2.98 respectively. I tell him it's not worth this much frustration, but he doesn't agree. In the group of girls ahead of us, one of them keeps turning around to look at my cousin and I. My cousin took this as they were starting to follow them, so at the light he said to turn left, onto another street, to make it look like we weren't. This was the mistake. I didn't care too much since we were going to the park, and it was actually quicker to go this new way, but we were going to meet his friend at her work, so going straight would have been easier. But it doesn't matter. We turn left and walk down the new street. I still know where we're going. Make a right at the next corner, and then it's a straight shot into the park. Heck, I even have a cousin that lives on that corner. As we pass a nightclub, Podroom, my cousin gets on the phone with his friend to tell her that we're on our way, but we might be a little late since we went a different way. We're drawing closer to the corner, and we walk around a bus shelter. On the corner stands a guy who looks to be a bit nervous. He has his hands in a little fanny pack in front of him. Once I saw him, I got that gut feeling that told me that this wasn't okay. My cousin, oblivious to his surroundings, keeps walking towards the man, so I do as well. Tell myself that everything will be okay. I'm in Croatia, not New York, so nothing bad will happen. I look up again to see the man walking towards me with a gun drawn. The moment that I see the gun, all the blood leaves my face. I start freaking out and yell "what the heck" in a wavering and obviously scared voice. It's at the point that I yelled that my cousin started to pay attention. He later told me that the man said "daj mi lovu," give me money, but I didn't hear anything. We're still walking towards each other and we lock eyes. We get really close, so we do a little turn thing. Now, instead of my left shoulder facing the street, I have my back to the street. My first instinct after yelling profanities was to reach down to my waist and grab my own gun. Well, I don't have one on me, so I do the next thing that I can think of. I grab the dude's wrists. My thought process was if I could grab his wrists and turn them away from me, I would effectively neutralize the gun, since it wouldn't be pointed at me anymore, and he wouldn't be able to turn it towards me because his wrists are immobilized. I'm not sure how I thought of this. My favorite TV show is Archer, so maybe I constructed the idea from all the Archer that I've watched. I don't know. Either way, it's what I did, and what I later found out to be the worst possible thing I could have done. In one quick motion, I bring my hands up from my side and grab onto the guy's wrists, and turn them outward. The guy looked to be in shock that I did what I did. His eyes opened wide. A look of sheer surprise appeared on his face, and he kind of jumped back a bit. I don't remember exactly what the next thing was that happened, but he quickly regained his senses and pulled the trigger of the gun. I'm not sure if I had gotten the gun pointed entirely away from me or not when this happened. Either way, the man pulled the trigger of the gun and I heard the revolver turn. My first thought was, oh my god, this whack job just shot me. Then I almost immediately realized that 1, I had not been shot, and 2, there was no loud bang that accompanies a gunshot. This bloke didn't even have bullets in his gun. I looked down, noticed the barrel is missing from the revolver. Honestly, the least important part. And back at the guy. The look on his face made me realize the whole little thing was up. I actually thought this was some sort of practical joke, and my cousin and the guy were going to start laughing at me for being so foolish for thinking that I would actually be attacked in Zadar. No such laughter came. I stared at the guy in his eyes one last time, and then I threw him away from me as hard as I could. He stumbled back a bit and just stood there dumbfounded. My cousin then started yelling at him in Croatian. "What the heck? Why would you do this? Get out of here," etc. My cousin then snaps a picture of the guy, and he turns off and briskly walks away. It was at this point that I realized the entire gravity of the situation. I start shaking a bit and getting really agitated. I could have died. I look over to my cousin and sarcastically say, "Thanks for all your help," to which he responded with, "I wanted you to have your moment of glory." I roll my eyes and start walking away. We turn down Ravnice and head for the old town. On our right is a fence and a schoolyard behind it. We see the man sulking about in the dark of the schoolyard. He sees us and walks towards us. I start to freak out some more as I'm still shaking from before, but my cousin whips out his phone and takes another picture, and the guy hurries off back towards the corner. My cousin and I quicken our pace, and soon we're in the park. In town, we talk about what happened and whether or not to go to the police with this. We never really came to a conclusive decision as we pass by a police station. We say, "What the heck? We're here already," and go to report the crime. I honestly wish I didn't, as we reported it at 10 and didn't get out of the station until midnight. I was mad. My cousin was mad, and his friends were mad as we had missed out on about 2 hours of drinking. I just want to take some time and say that despite this story, Croatia is extremely safe. I had never had any problems prior to this one, and never heard of anything like it. When I told my family, they almost laughed, thinking that I was kidding, because this type of thing almost never happens. So please don't think that Croatia is a bad country. It isn't. It's incredibly beautiful, and you should definitely visit if you can. Maybe just avoid the corner of Ravnice and Morlica at night. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them. I also hope that you enjoy the extra rain at the end. Get a good night's sleep, everyone, and I'll read to you in the next video. Bye-bye now.